Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're really digging into a huge piece of legislation. It's been making waves, well, everywhere, affecting everything from your taxes to healthcare, even land management.
That's right.
We're talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBA.
OBBA, yeah, quite the name.
It really is. And this isn't just some, minor update. It's this sprawling document, I think, over 900 pages long?
Easily, yeah, it's substantial.
And it touches on so many parts of American life. So our mission today, really, is to cut through all the noise, pull up the key things you need to know, and help you understand what this actually means for you. Because these changes, they're starting to roll out.
Exactly. The timeline is crucial here.
So let's unpack this. This bill, it definitely generated a lot of buzz, a lot of controversy, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It was quite the political battle. It officially became law on July 4th, 2025. A symbolic date, perhaps.
July 4th, okay.
But getting there was, well, intense.
Opponents saw it causing massive disruptions in healthcare. They called it an injustice, arguing it mostly just gives tax cuts to the wealthy without helping ordinary Americans.
So a real clash of economic philosophies.
Exactly. Supply side versus demand side. Tax cuts versus social investment. That was the heart of the debate.
Healthcare and social safety net, the human impact.
Okay, that tees up the next big area perfectly.
Right.
The human impact. Let's dive into what this actually means for people's health, their safety nets. You mentioned deep cuts to Medicaid. That's a program millions rely on.
Mm-hmm.
What are the specifics there? Who's going to feel this immediately? What changes for them?
Yeah, the Medicaid changes are really significant, and they will affect millions. The CBO estimated that federal spending on Medicaid and also ACIP, that's the Children's Health Insurance Program, will be cut by $1 trillion over a decade.
Another $1 trillion figure.
Right, $1 trillion. That's roughly maybe a 15% cut in federal funding over 10 years for these programs. And that's not just a number on a page, right? That translates directly into fewer services, maybe less support, or definitely higher costs for the people who depend on these programs.
Okay, so higher costs.
Yeah.
How idly? What's changing for the people enrolled?
One of the biggest shifts is these new out-of-pocket costs. The bill actually forces states to charge Medicaid enrollees with family incomes between 100% and 138% of the federal poverty level, the FPL.
Okay, so just above the poverty line, basically.
Exactly. People who are working but low income. For a single adult, 100% FPL is just over $15,600 a year. So people in that range could now face charges up to 5% of their household income.
5%. That sounds like potentially a lot for someone on that income level.
It is. Let's make it real. Take a Medicaid expansion adult, maybe in a family of 4, with an income of just $33,000. That's just over 100% FPL for that family size. They could be on the hook for up to $1,650 in new mandatory out-of-pocket costs every year.
$1,600 for a family making $33,000. That's a huge hit.
It's a massive burden. For families already struggling, that could mean choosing between going to the doctor, paying rent, or buying groceries. It forces impossible choices.
And what's this I read about providers being able to turn people away?
That's maybe even more impactful. The bill also allows providers to turn patients away who can't afford to pay those costs. This is right there in the text, Section 71120, dealing with cost sharing. It creates a direct barrier.
So if you show up and can't pay the new copay or whatever it is, they can say no.
That's what the provision allows.
Yeah.
And research consistently shows, that even modest increases in out-of-pocket costs create significant financial barriers for low-income people. It often leads them to skip care, reduce use of care, and poorer health outcomes.
They put off seeing the doctor or don't fill a prescription.
Exactly. Until maybe it becomes an emergency, which is way more expensive and worse for their health. Now, this specific part, the cost sharing and turning patients away, it starts to take effect on October 1st, 2028.
October 2028. Okay, so there's a bit of lead time.
A bit, yes. But it's coming, and is a fundamental change in how Medicaid works for that group.
Okay, so higher costs. And beyond that, it sounds like there are also new requirements just to keep your Medicaid coverage, like work mandates.
Yes, that's another major piece. Work requirements are being introduced for many Medicaid recipients. This is a big shift.
Who does this apply to?
It's mainly for adults between 19 and 64, especially those who got coverage through the ACA expansion. The bill says they'd have to work at least 80 hours per month or fulfill similar criteria.
80 hours a month. What counts as similar criteria?
Things like job training programs, community service, maybe educational activities. It's framed as community engagement. The idea, proponents say, is to encourage work and self-sufficiency.
But what about people who can't easily meet that? People with health issues or maybe older workers?
That's the big concern. An AARP analysis found that about 9 million Medicaid recipients between the ages of 50 and 64 would face these requirements.
9 million people just in that age group.
Yes. And many in that group might be nearing retirement, maybe dealing with chronic health problems that make full-time work difficult, or perhaps they're working part-time jobs that don't hit that 80-hour mark. For them, it could be incredibly tough, potentially creating what the AARP called a steep coverage cliff.
A coverage cliff, meaning they just lose their insurance.
Exactly. If they can't meet the requirements, they could lose Medicaid with no affordable alternative. That can mean a lot more uninsured older Americans.
And where is this in the bill?
This is laid out in Section 7119, the part about requirements relating to demonstrating community engagement. Now, here's the key detail. States can ask for exemptions from these rules, maybe for certain populations or areas.
Okay, so there's some flexibility.
Limited flexibility. The bill says these exemptions shall expire not later than December 31st, 2028, and may not be renewed beyond that date.
So any exemptions are temporary. They run out at the end of 2028.
Correct. It sets a hard deadline. These work requirements become a permanent feature of Medicaid eligibility for this group after 2028, unless, Congress changes the law again.
Wow. Okay, work requirements. What about immigration status? You mentioned that earlier. How does the bill change who qualifies for Medicaid based on being an immigrant? This has always been complex.
It is complex, and this bill makes it significantly more restrictive. Starting October 4, 2026, the general rule becomes that aliens are ineligible for Medicaid.
Generally ineligible. Are there exceptions?
Yes, but they're quite specific and narrow. Things like people lawfully admitted for permanent residence, green card holders, or Cuban and Haitian entrants, or folks under a compact of free association, basically existing established legal statuses. But it cuts off eligibility for many others who might have qualified for limited or emergency services before.
What about people who are already enrolled, immigrants who have Medicaid now?
There's a bit of a delay for them. The bill says for individuals who are currently entitled to or enrolled for benefits. When the bill was enacted, this new rule applies beginning on the date that is 18 months after such date of enactment.
18 months after enactment, so that would be around January 2027.
Roughly, yes.
Yeah.
So there's a grace period for current enrollees, but the change is coming for them too. The argument for this is often about controlling costs and prioritizing citizens.
But the impact on those individuals?
Could be severe. John Slocum from Refugee Council USA put it starkly. He said this change will do irreparable harm to individuals we have promised to protect and impose unnecessary costs on local systems already under strain.
How does it impose costs on local systems?
His point is that if people lose access to basic preventative care through Medicaid, they'll end up using expensive emergency rooms when they get really sick. And often local hospitals and taxpayers end up footing that bill. It also raises, big ethical questions about healthcare access for everyone living here. This whole section is Section 71109, Alien Medicaid Eligibility.
Okay. Shifting within Medicaid. What about long-term care? Things like nursing homes or in-home care for seniors or people with disabilities. Are there changes there, especially around assets like home equity? That's often a huge worry for families.
Yes, the bill does address that, and interestingly, this is one area where there's actually an expansion or easing of rules, which is kind of contrary to the overall trend of the bill.
An expansion? How so?
It adjusts the home equity limit for determining Medicaid eligibility for long-term care services. Right now, there's a cap on how much your home can be worth for you to qualify for Medicaid paying for long-term care.
Right. People worry about having to sell their house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, starting January 1, 2028, this limit is going way up. It increases from $500,000 to $1 million.
Doubled, from $500,000 to $1 million.
Correct. So people needing long-term care can keep significantly more equity in their homes and still qualify for Medicaid assistance. For many families, their home is their biggest asset, so this could be a crucial protection, maybe allowing them to keep the family home or pass on some inheritance.
That's a pretty significant change in the other direction. Where's that found?
That's in Section 711108, Revising Home Equity Limit for determining eligibility for long-term care services. It's definitely an interesting outlier in a bill focused largely on cuts.
Okay, moving from Medicaid to Medicare. Huge program, millions of seniors rely on it. How does OBBA affect them? Are there direct changes or is it more indirect?
For Medicare, the impact is mostly indirect. stemming from the bill's overall financial consequences. There aren't really direct cuts to Medicare benefits spelled out in the bill itself.
But there are impacts.
Yes. One source mentioned, as an example, that a single Medicare enrollee making only $19,000 a year, someone eligible for the Medicare Savings Program, which helps with cost, could see their out-of-pocket costs jump significantly.
Jump significantly, like higher premiums or deductibles.
The source didn't specify the exact amount or mechanism for that example, but the implication was a noticeable increase in their financial burden. But the bigger, broader impact comes from something called PYGO.
PYGO, what's that?
It's the Statutory Pay-As-You-Go Act of 2010. It's a law that basically says if new legislation increases the deficit significantly, automatic spending cuts kick in across the board to offset it.
So because this OBBBA bill increases the deficit by so much.
Exactly. By that $3.4 trillion. That triggers PYGO. And the projection is that this will lead to automatic cuts to Medicare itself, meaning reduced payments to doctors, hospitals, etc., starting from 2027 to 2034.
So it's not seniors paying more directly necessarily, but the program itself getting cuts.
Primarily, yes, cuts to providers, which of course could eventually affect access to care or the quality of services down the line for everyone on Medicare. It's the bill's fiscal policy indirectly squeezing the program.
Okay, healthcare is obviously huge, but the bill also hits another basic need. Food assistance. Yes, SNAP, what we used to call food stamps. What's happening there?
Yeah, SNAP is facing some major changes, particularly in how it's funded. This could really affect families struggling with food insecurity.
How is the funding changing?
Right now, SNAP benefits are 100% federally funded. The federal government covers the whole cost of the food aid. That's changing. Starting October 2027, most states will have to start paying a share between 5 and 15% of the cost of the SNAP benefits their residents get.
So states have to chip in for the food costs now.
Yes, a significant new financial burden for states. They'll either have to find that money in their budgets or potentially reduce benefits somehow. And that's not all. States will also have to cover a much bigger chunk of the administrative costs running the program, caseworkers, etc.
How much bigger?
It's going up substantially. Previously, the FERS covered 50% of admin costs. Under this bill, Section 10106 says that for fiscal year 2027 and onwards, the federal share drops to just 25%.
Wow, so states have to cover 75% of the admin costs.
Exactly. And the matching funds for the benefits themselves are in Section 10105. It's a double whammy for state budgets.
What does this mean for families who rely on SNAP?
It's likely to create real challenges. Sister Van Duzen from Catholic Charities, she works directly with these families, estimates that SNAP benefits typically only cover food for about 16 days out of a given month.
Just over half the month.
Right. And she says food pantries might provide another 3 to 5 days more. But that still leaves this gap, maybe 9 to 12 days at the end of the month, where families just don't have enough food.
What do they do then?
She says they have had to rely on emergency food disbursements and soup kitchens to bridge that gap. And her fear is that with states now facing these new costs, that gap could widen, putting even more pressure on local charities and increasing hunger.
This sounds particularly tough for vulnerable populations. What about rural areas? Rural hospitals are often struggling financially, and there were also changes mentioned about accessing ACA subsidies.
Yes, rural hospitals are definitely a point of concern. They operate on really thin margins, serve populations that often rely heavily on Medicare and Medicaid, and are often the only healthcare provider for miles.
So cuts to Medicaid or changes really hit them hard?
It's exactly. Research from the Cecil G. Shep Center, which studies rural health, concluded this bill would push more than 300 rural hospitals toward service reductions or closure. They specifically mentioned states like Kentucky, Louisiana, California, and Oklahoma as being particularly vulnerable.
Over 300 hospitals potentially closing. That's devastating for those communities.
It would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
Now, the bill does try to address this. Section 714A1 sets up a rural health transformation program. It provides some funding allotments for states, specifically for rural hospitals, from fiscal years 2026 through 2030.
So there's some money set aside.
Yes, but there's a catch.
Mhm.
No more than 10% of that money can be used for planning or admin. And whether this funding is enough to counteract the pressures from the other cuts remains a big question.
Okay, and what about the ACA subsidies, the help people get to afford insurance on the marketplaces?
There's a change specifically for people who enroll outside the normal open enrollment period. If you lose your job, have a baby, get married, there's qualifying life events.
Right, the special enrollment periods.
Exactly. Currently, when you apply during one of those periods, you can get up to 90 days of premium help, while your application and documents are being processed, which can take time.
Okay, so you get help right away.
Under this bill, that changes. You'll have to wait for all your documents to be processed before receiving government subsidies.
Wait, so if I lose my job in insurance, I might have to wait weeks or months paying full price before the help kicks in.
That seems to be the effect. You could face a gap where coverage is unaffordable right when you need it most. Republicans argue this is necessary to cut down on fraudulent enrollments. Opponents see it very differently. They say it's just another way to undo Obamacare by making it harder and more expensive to get covered.
So adding up all these health changes, Medicaid cuts, work rules, SNAP changes, potential rural hospital closures, ACA subsidy delays, what's the bottom line for overall health insurance coverage?
The CBO did an analysis looking at the cumulative effect. Their estimate is pretty stark. They project that nearly 12 million people could end up uninsured because of this bill by the year 2034.
12 million more uninsured Americans. That's a huge number. It makes you wonder, what are the downstream effects on emergency rooms, public health, the economy?
Exactly. That's the big question hanging over all these healthcare changes. What are the ripple effects going to be over the next decade?
Taxation. Who benefits, who pays?
Okay, we've spent a lot of time on healthcare and safety nets, the spending side, the cuts. Let's flip to the other side now. Taxes. What does this bill mean for your wallet, for businesses? This seems to be a cornerstone of the bill for the administration.
It definitely is. The tax provisions are extensive, and they really drive a lot of that deficit increase we talked about. The bill essentially extends sweeping tax cuts passed in 2017 during Trump's first term.
So it makes those earlier tax cuts permanent, or extends them.
Extends them, yeah. Amounting to a total of $4.5 trillion in tax reductions over the next decade. That's where a lot of the $3.4 trillion deficit figure comes from. The administration argues this will boost the economy, incentivize investment, put money in people's pockets.
But who gets most of that $4.5 trillion? Is it spread evenly?
Well, that's the core of the debate again. Multiple analyses have found that wealthier taxpayers are most likely to benefit. One specific analysis concluded the bill will increase the cost of living and lower after-tax income for the bottom 40% of earners while giving the top 20% of earners a $6,000 per year average tax cut.
So lower earners actually end up worse off, while higher earners get a cut. How does that work?
It could be a combination of factors. Maybe the tax cuts are structured to benefit higher brackets more, or perhaps the spending cuts in areas like healthcare or SNAP disproportionately hit lower income groups, offsetting any small tax benefit they might receive. It suggests a significant redistribution, potentially widening that inequality gap.
Okay, let's get specific. There was a lot of talk about new deductions, things like tips and overtime pay. That sounds like it could help a lot of working folks. What's the reality there?
Yes, those are new, and they sound appealing. The bill does allow taxpayers to deduct income earned from tips and overtime. You can find these in Section 224 for qualified tips and Section 225 for qualified overtime compensation. The idea seems to be a direct tax break for service workers or those putting in extra hours.
But are there limits, or is it unlimited?
Oh, there are definitely limits, big ones. The total deduction for both combined shall not exceed $12,500 for a single filer or $25,000 for a joint return.
12,500 or 25,000, okay.
And it gets phased out for higher earners. If your modified adjusted gross income is over $150,000 single or $300,000 joint, the benefit starts to disappear. And maybe most importantly,
Yes.
it's temporary. The bill explicitly says no deduction shall be allowed under this section for any taxable year beginning after December 31st, 2028.
Go on after 2028, so it's a short-term break.
Exactly. It expires in just a few years, not a permanent change to the tax code.
Okay, what other new deductions are there? I think I heard something about car loans.
Yes, another temporary one. It's a deduction for interest paid on loans for buying cars made in the U.S. This is in Section 163 Art, an exception for qualified passenger vehicle loan interest.
Made in the U.S., so an incentive for domestic auto purchases.
Clearly, trying to boost the American auto industry. But again, it's temporary. It only applies to tax years beginning after December 31st, 2024 and before January 1st, 2029. So a 4-year window for that benefit.
Okay. And anything specific for seniors?
Yes, there is a new temporary tax deduction for people 65 and older, and it's kind of flexible. You can take it even if you itemize or add it onto your standard deduction, which is already higher for seniors.
So extra relief for seniors. Any limits on that one?
Yes, it's also reduced for higher earners. It phases out above $175,000 for a single filer and $250,000 for a couple. And, you guessed it,
Temporary?
temporary. It also is set to expire in 2029, so like the others, it's not a permanent structural change.
What about charitable giving? Any changes to how donations are treated?
There are changes affecting both people who take the standard deduction and those who itemize. For people who take the standard deduction, which is most taxpayers, now the bill allows them to deduct up to $1,000 single or $2,000 joint for charitable donations.
Oh, that's new, right? Usually you have to itemize to deduct donations.
Correct. This is a new benefit designed to encourage giving from a broader range of people, not just higher income itemizers.
Okay, that sounds positive for charities. What about people who do itemize?
There's a new restriction for them. Section 70425 adds what's called a 0.5% floor. This means itemizers can only deduct charitable contributions to the extent that the total amount exceeds 0.5% of the taxpayer's contribution base for the taxable year.
0.5% floor. So if my income is $100,000, I can only deduct donations above $500.
Exactly. It effectively makes the first chunk of your donations non-deductible if you itemize. This could reduce the tax benefit for people who make smaller regular contributions but still itemize. And this floor applies starting with tax years beginning after December 31st, 2025.
Okay, 2026 tax year onwards for itemizers. Got it. Anything else on individual taxes, like the child tax credit?
The bill extends the child tax credit, which is huge for families, but it adds a new requirement. It's in Section 24H, Social Security number required.
Social Security number. For whom?
For the taxpayer claiming the credit or at least one spouse on a joint return and for the qualifying child. You need valid SSNs for everyone involved.
And when does that requirement start?
It applies to taxable years beginning after December 31st, 2025. So starting with the 2026 tax year, you'll need those SSNs on the return to claim the credit, likely aimed at reducing errors or fraud.
Okay, let's shift from individuals to businesses. What are the big tax changes for companies, especially manufacturers? And I know there's been focus on semiconductors.
Right. Businesses, particularly manufacturers, get some significant incentives here aimed at boosting domestic production. Manufacturers are probably quite happy because the bill lets them fully and immediately deduct the cost of building new manufacturing facilities.
Fully deduct immediately. That's like expensing, right? Huge for cash flow.
Exactly. It's a powerful incentive called full expensing or bonus depreciation. It significantly lowers the upfront tax cost of building a factory in the U.S. And this provision is temporary, but it's retroactive to January 19th, 2025, and applies to construction that begins before January 1st, 2029.
So a push to build now.
Definitely. Section 70307 covers this special depreciation allowance, and it applies to property actually placed in service before January 1st, 2031. So the benefit extends a bit further out.
And semiconductors. Chips.
Yes, a big focus there too. The bill aims to boost domestic chip making by enhancing tax credits for building semiconductor manufacturing facilities here. Section 70308, Enhancement of Advanced Manufacturing Investment Credit, increases the credit from the existing 25% up to 35%.
35% back to tax credit. That's substantial.
Very substantial. It's a direct incentive to build those costly chip fabs in the U.S. These enhanced credits apply to property placed in service after December 31st, 2025.
Okay. Any other big breaks for businesses, like for R&D?
Yes, a significant change for research and development. The bill allows businesses to deduct any domestic research or experimental expenditures immediately.
Immediately. I thought there were changes recently where companies had to spread those costs out over time.
There were. This reverses or overrides that for domestic R&D. It allows immediate deduction again, which is a big win for companies investing in innovation here. This is in Section 174A, Domestic Research or Experimental Expenditures, and it applies to tax years beginning after December 31st, 2024. So it's effective now.
Okay, those are some big incentives. Are there any new taxes on businesses or specific industries?
Yes, there's a notable new tax targeting certain private colleges and universities specifically, those with large endowments.
Taxing university endowments, how does that work?
It applies to institutions with at least 3,000 tuition-paying students and an endowment of $500,000 or more per student. Section 70412 imposes a tax on their net investment income.
What's the rate?
It's tiered, 1.4% if the endowment per student is up to $750,000. It jumps to 4% if it's between $750,000 and $2 million per student. And it's 8% for endowments over $2 million per student.
8%. That could be a lot of money for schools like Harvard or Yale.
Potentially, yes. It's a new revenue source from these wealthy, often tax-exempt institutions. It's been debated for years.
Any other interesting tax tweaks? Maybe things affecting specific groups.
There's one getting attention in the gambling world. The bill modifies the rules around deducting wagering losses. A pro poker player, Phil Galfond, actually tweeted about it, saying he worried it would end professional gambling in the U.S. and hurt casual gamblers too.
How does it change things?
The specifics weren't fully detailed in our source, but Section 7R11 extends and modifies the limitation. It could make it harder to offset winnings with losses, which is crucial for professionals. This change applies to tax years beginning after December 31st, 2025.
Okay, something for gamblers to watch. Anything else small but notable?
Just one more on the business side. An inflation adjustment for qualified small business stock, or QSBS. This is a tax break for investing in certain small businesses. Starting after 2026, the $75 million limits associated with this gain exclusion will be indexed for inflation.
So the benefit grows over time.
Yes, tied to the Consumer Price Index, using 2025 as the base year instead of 2016. It's in Section 704424. A technical change, but potentially helpful for long-term small business investors.
Student loans reshaping future generations' debt.
All right, let's pivot now to another area that affects millions. Student loans. Student debt is just such a huge issue. What does OBBA do here? Especially for parents who take out loans and maybe grad students.
Yeah, this bill brings some really major shifts in the student loan landscape, and not necessarily in a way that benefits borrowers. Let's start with parents.
Parent PLUS loans.
Exactly. Currently, parents who borrow using parent PLOS loans could consolidate them and then potentially get onto an income-driven repayment plan, or IDR, specifically the income contingent repayment, or ICR plan.
And IDR plans base your payment on your income, right? Makes it more manageable.
Correct. Lower payments if your income is low. And crucially, being on an IDR plan is usually required to qualify for Public Service Loan Forgiveness, PSLF.
Okay, so what's changing?
Well, under the OBBA, parents would lose that ability to access IDR plans through consolidation for new loans. The bill says only the standard repayment plan would exist for them.
Only the standard plan, so no income-based options for new parent borrowers.
That's the gist. If you're already on an ICR plan, you can stay. But new parent borrowers are shut out. And the big consequence, if you can't get on IDR, you also lose that ability to qualify for Public Service Loan Forgiveness.
Wow, so no PSLF option for future parent borrowers working in public service.
It seems that way because PSLF requires IDR enrollment. This removes a major safety net. These changes are in Section 82001B. And the timing is important. The amendments shall take effect on the date of enactment, but they apply differently. For new loans made on or after July 1, 2026, these new rules apply, including different repayment percentages based on income. For example, if your AGI is over $100, the payment is 10% of that.
July 1st, 2026, a key date for parents considering loans. What about grad students?
Another big hit there. The bill states, beginning on or after July 1st, 2026, a graduate or professional student shall not be eligible to receive a federal direct PLOS loan.
No more grad PLOS loans after July 1st, 2026. That's huge. How are grad students supposed to cover costs?
That's the question. Grad PLOS loans let students borrow up to the full cost of attendance. Without them, future grad students will have to rely solely on Stafford loans, which have much lower limits, or turn to private loans, which are often more expensive and less flexible. It could really limit access to advanced degrees. That's in Section 81011.
This sounds like it could really change the calculus for pursuing higher education.
It absolutely could. And related to that, the bill also sets new overall borrowing limits. Starting July 1st, 2026, the maximum aggregate amount of federal loans a student can borrow throughout their education is capped at $257,500.
$257,500 total. Does that include Parent PLS US?
No, it explicitly excludes Parent PLS US and Grad PLS as well. It still exists. But it puts a hard ceiling on Stafford loans and other direct federal borrowing for students. This is in Section 81001 It could affect students in very long or expensive programs like medicine.
Okay. Are there any other changes, like for borrowers who run into trouble, maybe their school committed fraud or closed down?
Yes, there are delays enacted for those specific relief programs. For loans that originated before July 1st, 2035, the ability to apply for borrower defense to repayment if your school defrauded you, and close school discharges if your school shut down is delayed.
Delayed until 2035.
The application of the rules seems delayed for loans originated before that date. The specifics are in Section 8401A for borrower defense, and Section 84002A for closed school discharge. It means these crucial protections for students harmed by schools might not be readily available for a long time, leaving borrowers potentially stuck with debt from fraudulent or defunct institutions.
Government spending and policy shifts from border to bombs.
All right, let's shift gears dramatically now. The bill doesn't just cover taxes and domestic programs. It includes massive spending and policy changes for things like immigration, border security, and defense. Let's start with the border. What's happening there?
Yeah, this is a huge focus area in the bill, with a massive injection of funding. The bill allocates $30 billion overall to immensely expand enforcement and deportation operations of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE.
$30 billion, just for ICE and related activities.
Primarily, yes. It signals a major ramp-up in immigration enforcement, both at the border and inside the country. It's a clear empowerment of the administration's priorities in this area, despite criticisms that this approach makes little distinction between, say, dangerous criminals and people seeking asylum or work.
Can you break down where that money is going, like the wall?
Yes, physical barriers are definitely part of it. Section 90001, Border Infrastructure and Wall System, specifically appropriates $3 million, that's $3 billion, just for planning, design, construction, and maintenance of barriers, roads, lights, sensors along the border. And that money is available until September 30, 2029.
$3 billion for the wall and related tech. What about personnel? More agents?
A lot more. Section 9002 provides $4,100 million, $4.1 billion specifically to hire and train more Border Patrol agents, customs officers, Office of Field Operations, and other staff. That funding also lasts until September 30, 2029.
$4.1 billion for hiring.
And on top of that, there's another $2,052,630,000 allocated just for recruitment, retention bonuses, hiring incentives, performance bonuses for CBP personnel. So a huge push to significantly increase staffing.
It sounds like a massive buildup of the enforcement apparatus. Are there other immigration changes? Fees, maybe?
Yes, a whole slew of new fees for various immigration applications and processes. And importantly, these fees often have an initial amount set for fiscal year 2025, but then they get adjusted for inflation annually starting in FY 2026.
Right.
And the bill explicitly says no fee waivers are allowed for many of these.
No waivers, so everyone pays, regardless of income. What kind of fees are we talking about?
Examples include an employment authorization work permit fee for asylum applicants, initially set at $550, Section 103. A new immigration parole fee, initially $1,000, Section 104, and even an inadmissible alien apprehension fee, initially $10,000, Section 1,007.
$1,000, who pays that?
The details would be in the regulations, but it represents a significant new cost associated with the immigration process, likely acting as a deterrent or revenue source. Critics argue these fees create huge financial barriers, especially for vulnerable populations.
What about unaccompanied children crossing the border? Any changes there?
Yes. New requirements for the sponsors who take them in. Things like mandatory background checks and in-person or virtual interviews to vet the sponsors. And the bill also funds criminal and gang checks of unaccompanied alien children who are 12 years of age and older.
Bang checks on 12-year-olds.
Yes, including examining them for gang-related tattoos and other gang-related markings. That's in Section 105111. Proponents say it's for safety and security. Opponents raise serious concerns about treating vulnerable children like criminals and potential profiling.
Okay, moving from the border to the Pentagon. The bill also includes significant funding for the Department of Defense. What are the priorities there?
Yes, substantial DoD appropriations for fiscal year 2025, with the funds available through September 30, 2029, giving them long-term budget stability. Some key areas focus on quality of life for troops. There's $2.5 billion for improving military unaccompanied housing barracks, essentially.
$2.5 billion for barracks. Okay.
Another $2 billion goes to the Defense Health Program, supporting military health care. And $2.9 billion is allocated to supplement the Basic Allowance for Housing, BAH, helping troops afford off-base housing, especially in expensive areas.
So investments in personnel support. What about hardware? Weapons systems.
Big investments there, too. $2.725 billion for procuring TAO oilers. Those are the Navy's refueling ships, crucial for global operations.
Right.
Another $1.470 billion funds a multi-ship amphibious warship contract, boosting the Navy's ability to land Marines ashore.
Oilers and amphibs. What else? Advanced tech.
Definitely. The bill heavily invests in air and missile defense, and notably there's $400 million for acceleration of hypersonic strike programs. That's the super-fast missile technology everyone's racing to develop. That's in Section 2003.
$400 million just for hypersonics. Wow. Any other notable defense items?
Couple more. $150,000 is earmarked for business systems replacement to accelerate the audits of the financial statements of the Department of Defense. Try and get a handle on DoD's finances, which has been a long-standing issue.
Trying to pass an audit, finally.
That seems to be the goal, and billions more are allocated to speed up construction of National Nuclear Security Administration facilities and generally modernize the nuclear arsenal. So nuclear modernization is clearly a top priority.
Okay, beyond defense, there were some unusual appropriations mentioned. Funding for the White House Budget Office, OMB, and even for training judges. What's that about?
Yeah, those stood out. The bill gives $100 million directly to the White House Office of Management and Budget, OMB. Critics immediately jumped on this, calling it a slush fund for unaccountable Trump administration overreach. They pointed out the OMB director was a key Project 2025 architect.
Project 2025,
Yeah.
That's the conservative plan to reshape government.
Exactly. So the concern is this funding gives OMB extra power to implement that kind of agenda without normal congressional oversight. This appropriation is in Section 90103.
And the funding for judges, that seems really unusual.
It is quite unique. Section 100-102 appropriates $100 million to the Federal Judicial Center, which is training for federal judges and court staff.
Okay, the training on what?
Specifically, the bill directs training on the absence of constitutional and statutory authority supporting legal claims that seek non-party relief against the federal government, and also training on strategic approaches for mitigating the aggregate cost impact of such legal claims on the taxpayers.
So, training judges on why they shouldn't grant broad relief in lawsuits against the government and how to limit the cost of those lawsuits.
That seems to be the intent. It's telling the judicial branch what legal theories it should be skeptical of, particularly in cases seeking widespread remedies like class actions or injunctions affecting many people. It's Congress funding specific legal instruction for judges, which raises questions for some about judicial independence.
Okay, let's talk environment and energy. The bill seems to make some big shifts there too, cutting funding for some programs, changing rules for others. What's the overall direction?
It's definitely a significant rollback of many clean energy and climate initiatives. There are extensive rescissions. That means taking back funding that was already
So
allocated.
take back money.
Well, what? Things like the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. There was a major pool of money meant to fund clean energy projects. That's repealed entirely in Section 6002. Funding for clean heavy-duty vehicles like electric trucks is rescinded, Section 6001. Money for environmental and climate justice block grants is also gone, Section 6016. It's a clear reversal of prior policy aimed at climate action.
So defunding those green programs. Anything else impacting renewables?
Yes, there's a denial of credit for wind and solar leasing arrangements for certain key tax credits, Section 45Y for production and Section 48E for investment. This could make it harder to finance large wind and solar farms, especially if they're built on leased land.
And I think you mentioned critical minerals earlier, used in batteries and tech.
Right. There's a phase out of tax credits for applicable critical minerals. The credit drops from 75% in 2031 down to 50% in 2032, then 25% in 2033, and hit 0% after December 31st, 2033. So a clear timeline for ending that incentive.
Any other credits ending?
Credits specifically for wind energy components terminate after December 31st, 2027, and for metallurgical coal after December 31st, 2029. These phase-outs and terminations are in Section 45XB2.
So a definite shift away from supporting renewables and related industries. Is anything getting extended or boosted?
Well, the clean fuel production credit is extended through December 31st, 2029, Section 45ZG. So continued support there. And there's an interesting modification to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the SPR.
Emergency oil supply.
Yes. Its purpose is broadened. It can now be used not just for oil emergencies, but also to increase capacity or output, or to support or enable the provision of known or forecastable electric supply necessary to maintain or enhance grid reliability. Section 50401A2.
So they could release oil from the SPR to burn in power plants to keep the lights on.
That seems to be what it allows, using the oil reserve to backstop the electricity grid, potentially smoothing out issues with renewable intermittency or other supply shortages.
What about using federal lands? Does the bill push for more resource extraction like oil, gas, or logging?
Yes, very explicitly. It includes mandates to increase extraction. For oil and gas, Section 501101C requires the Interior Secretary to hold a minimum of 4 oil and gas lease sales annually in 9 specific states like Wyoming, New Mexico, Alaska.
4 sales a year minimum.
Yes. And those sales have to offer not less than 50% of the available land in those areas. So a constant, significant push for more leasing.
What about timber? Logging?
Similar mandates there. The Forest Service is required to sell 20% greater timber volume annually than they did in FY 2025, and that's for every year from fiscal years 2026 through 2034. The Bureau of Land Management, BLM, has to increase its annual sales by 20 million board feet each year over the previous year for the same period. Those are in Section 5201.
So big increases in mandated logging on federal lands.
Significant increases, yes. Proponents argue it's needed for forest health and local economies. Opponents worry about the environmental impact.
Is there anything about renewable energy on public lands, like wind or solar farms?
Yes, there's a change in how the revenue from those projects is shared. Starting January 4th, 2026, the money from bids, rent, fees gets split. 25% to the state, 25% to the county, 25% to the reclamation fund, 15% to BLM itself, and 10% for other uses. That's in Section 5302B1, a new formula giving states and counties a bigger cut.
Okay, nearly there.
Yeah.
Just a couple more specific items. There was something about unemployment benefits for millionaires.
Yes, a very specific provision in Section 733001. It prohibits paying unemployment compensation to anyone whose wages during their base period, the period used to calculate benefits, are equal to or exceed $1 million.
So if you earned $1 million or more before losing your job, no unemployment checks for you.
Correct. It's aimed at ensuring unemployment is a safety net for those who genuinely need it, not high earners. And this applies to weeks of unemployment beginning on or after the date of the enactment of this act, so it's effective immediately.
Got it. And finally, what about the COVID RTC, the Employee Retention Tax Credit from the pandemic? Any changes there?
Yes, 2 key things. First, Section 11001B imposes a new penalty for knowingly submitting false or fraudulent COVID RTC documents. This targets the widespread fraud seen with this program and applies to documents submitted after the date of the enactment. So new submissions face this penalty.
Okay, cracking down on fraud. What else?
Perhaps more importantly, Section 11001B effectively slams the door shut on claiming the credit. It says no credit or refund for the COVID RTC will be allowed after the date of the enactment of this act, unless the claim was already filed by the taxpayer on or before January 31st, 2024.
January 31st, 2024. That deadline already passed.
Exactly. So if a business hadn't filed their ERTC claim by that date, they're now out of luck even if they were eligible. It's a hard cutoff for any new or amended claims going forward.
Yeah.
Outro.
Wow. Okay. We have covered a truly massive amount of ground today. I mean, this deep dive into the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, it really shows a legislative package that's set to reshape huge parts of American life for, well, years to come.
Absolutely. From how you access and pay for healthcare to your tax bill to student debt, immigration policy, defense spending, even how we manage natural resources, the scope is just immense. And those effective dates we talked about are so critical. These changes aren't all happening at once.
Right. Some are immediate, some phase in over years, some expire.
Exactly. It's clear this bill represents a really dramatic shift in direction. It streamlines some things, yes, but it also imposes a lot of new requirements, new costs, new restrictions in other areas. Understanding those specifics, the dates, the dollar amounts, the section numbers we mentioned, that's really key to grasping the full picture. The ripple effects will be unfolding for a long time.
Which brings us to the final question for you, our listener, to think about. Considering this vast range of impacts touching everything from your personal finances to huge national policies on energy and defense, how do you think this one big, beautiful bill might actually reshape the fabric of daily life here in the United States over the next decade?
Yeah, and what about those unintended consequences? The ripple effects that maybe weren't planned or foreseen as all these different provisions actually take full effect, not just nationally, but maybe right there in your own community.
It's definitely something to ponder. We encourage you to continue your own deep dive. Maybe look into how these changes specifically affect your situation, your healthcare, your finances, what's happening with resources in your local area as the bill's effects really start to unfold.
Stay informed, stay engaged.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us for this very comprehensive deep dive today.
My pleasure.
We'll be back soon with another stack of sources to unpack.